The background noise says it all. Yeah, we didn't really get to the sub yesterday. We got to the balcony. Then we got ordered back because of the too high winds. And actually, that's what's going on right now. If you look at our tents.
So there I was, lying in my sleeping bag, rolling it up, my hat down, my down jacket on. I was freezing. It had about minus 20 degrees outside. That's about like sleeping in your freezer. The wind was blowing and like the tent poles were coming over, and I felt miserable. I felt devastated. Because about a few hours earlier, I had returned from an attempt to climb the highest mountain in the world. We came very far, but we ran into a storm. And when I returned to my tent, being lucky to even be alive, I looked like a giant icicle. I was frustrated. I came there. It was weeks of climbing on the mountain, months of preparation. I was like, wow, what I'm doing here? Why do I go here from now? This is just not what I wanted to do. And I was so far away from the life I had before. I was so far away from the life I had before, because about 2 months earlier, I was working on a desk job. I was going to work in the morning at 7, I was coming out late. I was staring in a multiple of computer screens, and the biggest adventure I had was clicking around with my mouse. And then I decided to basically leave that behind, and on the day I left, a colleague sent me an email. And in the email it said, and probably it's hard to read, but in the subject line it said, "Congrats to your breakout." And in text it says, "A hamster wheel from the inside looks like a career ladder." And that's pretty much how I felt at that time. I felt like I was in sort of not going anywhere in my life. But how did I get there, and how did the whole thing actually bring me to Everest? So I grew up in a small, relatively remote village in Austria. It's pretty much away from the big world, as you can imagine. And in my childhood, growing up as a teenager, there were like 4 objectives. Objective number 1, get a job, primarily until you retire. Secondly, marry. Third, get kids. Never mix up number 2 and number 3. And 4, build a house. Well, I sort of didn't even come to number 1, because right after my studies at university, I decided to actually move abroad. That probably was a bit driven by, if you grow up between hills and mountains, I was just bound to go out and experience something new, and I joined an investment bank. Now, luckily they never knew. I didn't even know what an investment bank was doing when I actually joined up for it, but it sounded cool, and it was cool. So I started working. It was fantastic. I worked with smart people. A lot of them got really good friends. We worked on highly complex things I never had an idea about, that's things you actually can work on. I worked long hours. It was super motivating, and the more I actually got into it, I worked more and more and more. And I moved to London. I got really sucked into the lifestyle, and it was fantastic, because obviously also the bank account didn't suffer either. And yeah, the life was great until there wouldn't have been a twist. On a Friday afternoon, I was observing a conversation in the canteen of our workplace. And there were 2 guys talking about an adventure in Africa. And out of some intuitive thing, some feeling I had, I decided to join up with them. And 24 hours later, I was on a plane to Africa to climb Kilimanjaro, the highest mountain in Africa. Now here comes life lesson number 1, never underestimate conversations you have on Friday afternoon in the coffee shop. But as I was there, it probably was my kind of naivety of being grown up in Austria, A, and B, being obviously so self-confident because I was working in the best industry in the world, that I thought walking up Kilimanjaro is going to be a walk in the park. Well, it wasn't. I came totally unprepared, untrained, didn't know what's going up with me. I suffered. I got the flu the second day, and it was really torture to go up there. But We managed to climb the top. I'm the one in the middle. I don't look really happy. But what could have been the end of my mountaineering career right there and then was actually the initiator of something new. I really went to Russia, which is here, yeah. To Russia, I went to the Caucasus, I went climbing in Papua, I went climbing in the Andes, and then before I even knew it, ended up in Antarctica. Now, that actually meant I just had climbed what they so-called 5 of the 7 summits, and we had somebody talking about this morning already. It's like the highest mountains of every continent, but for me it was more getting away. No BlackBerry reception, no mobile phone reception meant I was really away from work and nobody could get me, and these breaks were actually what kept me sort of in my job. And as I was in Antarctica, the idea came up, well, in order to complete the Project 7 Summits, we obviously need to go to Everest. But Everest needs several months of dedication and climbing. That's clearly not possible. I cannot convince my boss. But I had some friends and they kept on calling me and they said like, hey Paul, come on, join us, come on that trip. And I said, no, I'll do it next year. It was always next year, because 1 year more working, which obviously started to be less and less fun. What was an immense learning curve at the beginning, flattened out. It was actually the same kind of things. We worked all the time. The job was not so great anymore because sort of the global financial crisis made banking not as cool anymore as it was before. So it started to be all a little bit, well, you know, I'm not really motivated by one thing, but I can't really leave it behind. And then one day, it was in fall 2012, I got another call from a friend, and he said, Paul, come on, come with us, I have a spot for you, join us in Everest. I said, nah, not again. And that day, it was a relatively tough day at work. I worked home, and I was in the tube, and I walked by this advertisement for an amateur sailing race. And I probably had passed this ad for about 20 times before, but I never really studied what was written there. It was a quote from Mark Twain. It's relatively often quoted, but it said that basically in a few years' time we probably will regret more the things we didn't do than the things we actually did. And on that day, it clicked for me. I connected the one dot. Oh, my friend's actually telling me it was a bad day at work with that kind of quote. I went home, sent an email to my friends like, I'm in. And before I knew it, I was actually on the way to Nepal. Now, don't get me wrong, it was not 24 hours later. A few months of preparation were involved. Here comes life lesson number 2, not to repeat a mistake I did before again. And in that few months, I obviously said sort of goodbye to my corporate life. And I went on and prepared myself for the trip, because going to Nepal was for me like a next step. It was sort of it should have been the trip to basically free myself from that corporate chains I was wearing before. Now, the Himalayas are immensely beautiful. It's a fantastic landscape, but it's also immensely hostile to humans. It's cold, it's windy, the altitude, etc. We had our tragedies in the trip, and we had to constantly brace a lot of danger. Now there I was, 7 weeks into the expedition, months in preparation, lying in my tent in that storm, just having reconverted from an icicle into a human being again. But obviously heavily frustrated, we didn't make it to the summit, the storm was still brewing out there. And call it my stubbornness, or maybe my dedication to reach a goal, something which obviously must have picked up in my years in working in the bank. I sort of stayed, well, let's stay put. Most of my friends went down. Me and my tent partner stayed up there, bracing the storm. And about 20 hours later, we got rewarded when the weather cleared and we got a second try and managed to climb to the top. And as I was approaching that top of the world, going the last miles, I was like, oh, so great, I'm almost there. This is the freeing moment. This is where I want to be. And honestly, it's an amazing feeling to stand on top of the world. It's like you look down, it must be the most wonderful square meter of real estate in the world. It's like, and I can prove there is no other mountain around it which is basically higher. But what happened for me was, I was stressed. I was up there and I had to shoot pictures for family, for friends, for sponsors. I had to make congratulations. And I even had this idea, if it comes up, of solving a Rubik's Cube on the top of Mount Everest. Now, looking at this picture now, I really asked myself, why? Why did I do that? Because instead of being up there and enjoying the peace and the width of the world, I was basically just doing exactly the same thing again I had done for years and years in my job. I was making myself stress. So before I even knew it, I was on my way down, climbing down the mountain. It's not my tool today. I got stuck. Can you just switch to the next slide? It's fine too.
Wrong, next screen, please.
Yeah. Okay, so I wasn't stressed. Let's pick it up there. And I went down and I did what I did before. Like, I made another plan. So about 2 weeks later, I was in Alaska and climbing the next mountain. I climbed on the highest mountain in North America, summiting this one. I said, oh, cool, my project 7 Summits is completed. But what's next? What's next? What's next? And can you imagine this? About, whew, yeah, we can probably imagine it if I...
Wrong, next.
Next one, please. Yeah. About a few weeks later, I was actually on a sailboat. I joined that sailing race whose advertisement I had seen a year earlier, and which basically convinced me to go on my Everest trip and leave my corporate life behind. And now, imagine this, spending 36 days with 22 people on 500 square foot, without a shower, sailing 6,500 nautical miles from London to Rio de Janeiro. If nothing else gets you out of the comfort zone, that does. And it definitely did the job for me. So on the next slide, yes, you will see what happened. One night, I was sitting on the boat, looking out, 1,000 miles of ocean to the west, 1,000 miles of ocean to the east. Far away, no land, and I was there, just myself. And there for the first time it happened. It sort of came to me, well, I had escaped, to stay in the word of my friend's email, or better say, I had arrived. I had pressed my own reset button, the kind of thing where now I can actually start thinking again of what I'm doing now. And what came to mind was a sort of quote I had read earlier, which was, to have a living, we have to get. To have a life, we have to give. And it sort of corresponded with some of the charities I got involved in when starting doing this trip. And obviously, as we heard before, I was doing fundraising when I went on my kind of trips, and it was interesting to obviously go to people and say, oh, can you give me a check? Can you please give me some money to help support that cause? But one thing that came to me was like, is there anything in my skill set, in my experience, and the things I learned to contribute and to make a difference and basically change? So I started working with a Hong Kong-based charity, Enlighten HK, who helps epileptics here in Hong Kong. I worked with a foundation in Nepal to build DZI Foundation to build sanitary installation in very remote villages in Nepal, and we managed, hooray, amazing achievement, 350 toilets in the last 6 months. And obviously, as I went on these trips, I met or even spend time in Hong Kong. I met amazing people. So just a few months ago, I started this project in Hong Kong with some extremely motivated and creative people. I call it sort of the Hong Kong version of Robin Hood. What we're doing is basically recycling and upcycling luxury fashion to provide benefit for the almost 500,000 kids below the poverty line in Hong Kong. And these are the kind of projects which drove me further. And one of the most breathtaking experiences happened in February this year when I spent a month and a bit in Africa. And a friend of mine who had shared a tent with me on Everest said, like, Paul, I have this grassroots charity project. Don't you want to come there? And it was basically an orphanage in Kenya, looking after 37 kids. Most of the parents had died of HIV. And we basically were thinking, like, what's the best way how we basically can help them and give them a better future.
Let's go on the picture.
So this is basically when you give a camera to kids. It's like, well, where does this lead me from here? Next slide, please. And you probably asked, where do all these projects come from? Where's the red line? I think the red line is exactly where the red line was through all my stories. It was every time when I was thinking on, like, here's a decision I need to take at the bottom of my heart. Here is something where my gut says, I should go along with this. I mean, I'm a trained mathematician. I'm used to doing very rational decisions. But if it really comes push to shove, I basically said, well, it's the thing I actually firmly believe in. And all these projects I got involved in were like projects I really believe in, and that's where my heart is. So to give something on the way, I think what drove me through all the process and keeps on driving me is it's a relentless pursuit of the dreams I'm actually looking for, and channel that through what you actually believe in into your heart, and then the change we're all discussing today is possible, and only the sky is the limit. Thank you.